Hi everyone, it's Juan and welcome back to another book review. So today we're going to talk about the celebrated novel The Grapes of Wrath by the American writer John Steinbeck. The Grapes of Wrath was first published in 1939 and it is one of the best known American novels from the 20th century. And despite that, I didn't read it until very recently. The Grapes of Wrath was one of the classic novels I wanted to get to this year. I just thought it was high time I read it, so I included it into my list of books I wanted to read in 2021. But not only that, it was also my top 10 list of books I wanted to read this year. And if you want to check out what other books I am most looking forward to reading in 2021, I'm going to link to that somewhere up here, okay? But going back to The Grapes of Wrath, I had heard only good things about this novel, so my expectations were high. And now I can say that I am glad I finally read it. I'm so glad I've read The Grapes of Wrath that now I want to read more by Steinbeck, probably everything he wrote. But what I like the most about The Grapes of Wrath is how I identify not so much with any of the characters in the novel, but with the author. But because that probably does not make a lot of sense, I'm going to try to explain it the best I can, okay? So when I started reading the novel, I thought, this is good. I could see why so many people love it. And leaving the plot aside for now, I just love the way the novel's main character, Tom Joad, is introduced and how through him we get to know not only the rest of his family, but also the wider reality of a certain portion of American life in the early 20th century. So I was plodding along nicely with the novel. I was having a good time following the narrative that chronicles how the Joads are forced out of their native Oklahoma and their treacherous journey to California. I was also enjoying the characterization. The Joads read like real people to me and not caricatures or stereotypes of poor people. The Joads came alive for me very early on, and I was glad to embark with them on a trip through dusty roads and all kinds of weather until they got to California. But I only began to love the novel at a specific point, and I don't know if this ever happens to you. You know, when you are reading a novel and you are liking it just fine, but then you get to a specific episode and something clicks for you. Well, that doesn't always happen to me when I read, but it did happen with The Grapes of Wrath. So the novel is structured in such a way, right, that alternates plot chapters with intercalary chapters. So in the plot chapters, we follow the linear narrative of Tom Joad coming back to town in Oklahoma and joining his family on their journey to California. And relax, this is not a spoiler. A spoiler would be if I told you what happens to them, but I'm going to leave that to the end of this review and I will let you know when I get there, okay? So you can relax. So, okay, so that's the plot chapters. Now, the intercalary chapters give us a wider perspective on the plead of the characters by giving us context that explains why they must move, what they will encounter, etc. So Steinbeck interrupts the flow of the narrative with that structure, but I would say that is, you know, to me, the novel's structure is one of the things I enjoy the most about this novel. Anyway, I think I was talking about that moment when finally everything clicked for me and I stopped merely liking the novel and began to love it. Well, that moment happened for me in one of those intercalary chapters, specifically in chapter 19. Chapter 19 is where the narrator tells us about the history of the state of California. Now, for the narrator, and I take the narrator to be Steinbeck himself, the success of California has to do with greed. And I love the way he explains that so clearly and so directly. Now, retrospectively, I could see that all those intercalary chapters that I enjoy reading because they were so clearly written and full of interesting information were actually an integral part of the narrative. You could skip them and only read the plot chapters, but I think that would be a huge mistake. And I realized that only when I read chapter 19. But I guess I haven't told you what The Grapes of Wrath is about yet, or why I think you should read it, so let me try and address that now. So the novel is set during America's Great Depression that lasted, as you know, roughly between the Wall Street crash of 1929 until the US joined World War II in late 1941. So the novel begins in Oklahoma, which was one of the states affected by the Dust Bowl. The Dust Bowl was a series of droughts and dust storms that affected mainly Texas and Oklahoma. Many people who lived off the land in Oklahoma had to migrate west to California because of the Dust Bowl. In his novel, Steinbeck not only chronicles the migration of a fictional family of Okies, as they were derisively referred to by Californians, but also explores the reasons for their move, the difficulties they must face along the way, and what they will encounter once they get to California. And that is why the narrative structure that alternates the plot and more general information written almost as an essay works so well. Steinbeck wants to talk about the socioeconomic situation of many people in the United States, and he wants to explore the reasons why people like that must face poverty and discrimination. Steinbeck could have written an essay about this, but would an essay be read by as many people as have read The Grapes of Wrath around the world? And would an essay make readers sympathetic to the plight of the American rural poor? I highly doubt it. Steinbeck wrote a novel but used an unusual structure to make sure that readers did not lose sight of the importance of what they were reading. The Grapes of Wrath is it's not really about a bunch of fictional characters. To me, the jodes are a decoy to get readers to put themselves in the shoes of those dozens or hundreds of families who work off the land but who didn't own it, so they were forced to leave their homes to find land to work on in one of the nation's richest states. Now, Steinbeck does not spare us any details of the suffering these people experienced, but through the clever structure of the novel, he makes sure that we understand this is not to do with their character, their individuality, but it is something that they are powerless over. And I think that is revolutionary in American fiction, where normally the individual is celebrated and there is very little thought about the collective experience. But Steinbeck is smart because he still zeroes in on one family. There is still one main character, so he uses all the tricks a good American novelist has to tell us an important story. The Grapes of Wrath could have been a pamphlet, but the fact that it not only isn't that, but that it is also a great novel, one of the best I have ever read, at least, is a testament to his talent as a novelist. I think every decision Steinbeck made about this novel was right, and one of the biggest successes of The Grapes of Wrath is its main character. Tom Joad is the kind of literary hero that I think most readers would empathize with and root for. He is far from perfect. For instance, he can get violent, but everything he does in the novel is morally justified. Okay, there is a lot more I would like to say about this novel, but I can only do that if I talk about the plot in more detail. So if you haven't read The Grapes of Wrath yet, or don't want to hear any spoilers, you should probably stop watching this video right about now, because between now and the end of this video, I am going to talk about the plot of The Grapes of Wrath. I'm going to talk about the characters, some of its themes, in a lot more detail, and there will be some spoilers. So if you don't want any spoilers, you have been warned. You should stop watching now, and I'll see you again, I hope, for another book review. Okay, for those of you who are still here, I am going to summarize the plot of The Grapes of Wrath now. So the narrative begins with our hero, Tom Joad, making his way to the farm his family runs. He has been released from prison after about 4 years. He was in prison for manslaughter. Along the way back home, Tom meets a former preacher, Jim Casey, who joins him on that trip. So Tom is shocked to find no one at the farm when he gets there. Luckily, an old neighbor, Molly Graves, shows up and clarifies what is going on. He tells Tom that most of the families, including Tom's, have been evicted and are due to head to California to find work. He also tells Tom that his family is now at their uncle's. So the next day, Tom and Jim go there, where they indeed find the rest of the family, but only just because when they get there, Tom's family are packing up to move to California. They intend to work as fruit pickers when they get there. Tom and Jim join the family on their long journey to California on an old truck. Soon after they leave, Grandpa Jode passes away. Then the family encounters many others traveling west in the same pitiful conditions and because of the same reason. The Jodes meet a married couple, Ivy and Sarah Wilson, who help them with Grandpa's funeral. The Wilsons' car has broken up, but they can fix it with the help of the Jodes, so both families decide to make the rest of the journey together. However, Sarah is so sick that she decides she cannot continue beyond the California border. The closer they get to California, the more the Jodes hear about how there is also unemployment there. But because they have made it so far and they have nowhere else to go, they decide to keep going as planned. Soon after they arrive in California, Grandma Jode passes away. The Jodes try to find work in vain, they even struggle to find food, and they are forced to move to different camps. And I need to open a parenthesis here. When the Jodes arrive in California, I kept imagining those horrible camps for migrants that you see on the news. And I'm not just talking about the US southern border or places in the Mediterranean. There is one such camp here, right here on my island, right now, and I don't understand how that is the best we can do collectively. As long as people continue to be forced to leave their homes and are received by prejudice and violence, both physical and symbolic, in so many parts of the world, I think the Grapes of Wrath will continue to speak to us. It is heartbreaking. But let's go back to the novel. So the family, or what remains of it without Grandpa and Grandma, don't stay together for long under those horrible living conditions. Their oldest son, Noah, leaves, and so does Connie, who is married to Tom's sister, Rose of Sharon. Connie doesn't even care that his wife is pregnant. Now, apart from the overcrowded and dirty camps they are forced to stay in, there is also a lot of hostility and violence in California. Often the campers are vicious to each other, and when it comes to the local population, they are a mix of angry and afraid at the Okies, as they refer to these newcomers. To make things worse, there is little work to be found, and what little there is pays hardly enough for workers to survive. So Tom and other men want to unionize to improve the migrants' working conditions. There is a fight about this involving the deputy sheriff, Jim Casey, that former preacher who joined the Jodes before they embarked on their journey, knocks the sheriff off and is arrested. The police want to burn the camp down, so the Jodes move to a government-run camp, which turns out to be a more welcoming place for them. But there's trouble on the horizon. One day, Tom overhears a conversation at work and finds out that the police want to stage a riot in the camp so they can have the perfect excuse to shut it down. Tom organizes with other men and they are able to prevent the riot. The Jodes like living in the government-run camp, but their stay there is not sustainable because there simply isn't enough work. So they leave once again. They do find work as fruit pickers and earn a decent wage finally. But there is a reason for this. The landowners hired them to break a strike by their workers. Now, in the meantime, Jim Casey is freed from jail, and one day, Tom runs into him. It turns out that Jim is now organizing workers, which has earned him the animosity of some of the landowners. The police killed Jim in front of Tom, to which Tom reacts by getting violent and killing one of the officers. Tom runs away and hides from the police for a while, and in the meantime, the Jodes move to a cotton farm. The younger daughter, Ruthie, tells a friend that her brother, who has killed 2 men, is now in hiding. Ma Jode is afraid the police might find her son, so she asks him to leave. Tom does that, but he wants to continue Jim's job trying to get the migrant workers to organize themselves. Now, the cotton season ends, so the Jodes are once again jobless. Also, there is a flood, and to make things worse, Rose of Sharon gives birth to a stillborn baby. Ma takes what remains of the family to a dry barn. When they get there, they see a boy and his father who is dying of starvation. The man is starving because he has given what little food he had to his son. Rose of Sharon, because she has just given birth, is lactating. So Ma Jode has Rose of Sharon nurse the starving man. And that is the last scene of the novel. The Grapes of Wrath is an epic where the heroes are not even ordinary people, they are miserably poor. They don't have anything. They are desperate. They face sickness. the death of close relatives, abuse, they suffer violence, and yet those who stay within the family are willing to share what little they can with other people. We see that clearly in that shocking and symbolic ending where Rose of Sharon, who has just lost a child, is willing to breastfeed a stranger, a grown man who would otherwise die of starvation. But the Jodes are not special in this. Other migrants are just as generous and good, like the Wilsons they meet on the road, or even that dying man at the end who was willing to sacrifice himself so his child could survive. But not all migrants are good. Some of them are just as mean as the local landowners or the police in California. Even some members of the Jode family, like Noah or Rose of Sharon's husband, leave their family to their own devices selfishly. However, I don't think we could judge those people so lightly. Who knows what I would do if I was ever unfortunate enough to find myself in a similarly desperate situation. I think all judgment here should be reserved for the hate-filled local populations. I understand their fear, but clearly they have too easily forgotten where they come from, particularly the landowners who, as Steinbeck describes in that chapter 19 I mentioned earlier, only got to be landowners because they or their not long-lost ancestors took the land from the existing Mexican population when the US expanded westward in the 19th century. Of course, those early Hispanic populations had in turn also stolen the land from the indigenous populations before. Now, Steinbeck does a great job at showing us the bigger picture and contextualizing everything so brilliantly. The novel ends on a hopeful note. Despite all the humiliations they suffer, the Jodes and others like them have dignity, and they show the power of solidarity among fellow workers. Something that sounds almost revolutionary, but shouldn't really, and Steinbeck can convey all of this through art and not through a dry political pamphlet that many people could dismiss as socialist. So I am impressed by all of this, and I would recommend The Grapes of Wrath to absolutely everyone. But now I would like to hear what you think about this great novel, so please let me know in the comment section below, as usual. I am signing off now, so thank you for watching. I hope that you are all doing very well, and I hope to see you again very soon for another book review and for another video. Bye for now.